Okay, good morning, everybody. We'll go ahead and get started. I know we have a number of people on the phone, and maybe we could just do a real quick round of introductions. So our guest, Ruslan, will have an understanding of who's in the room and who's on the phone. So why don't we start down here at this end, and then we'll do the phone after the in-person. Yep, there are little microphones around the table, so when you speak, please hit the green button. We are recording this session for those who couldn't join us either in person or on the phone, and that way people can hear you. Thank you. Yeah.
Hi, this is Ann Shirishi with AQUO Shareholder Engagement Services.
Hi, this is Allison Smith with Cornerstone Capital. Glad to be here this morning.
Patricia Jurowitz, Responsible Sourcing Network.
Good morning. My name is Ruslan Meatif, Alternative Turkmenistan News.
I'm Maren Wilson, Responsible Sourcing Network.
Casper Mercy Investment Services.
Valerie Haynon, Mercy Investment Services.
Paloma Munoz, Investor Alliance for Human Rights.
And on the phone,
Chris Cox of Seventh Generation Interfaith Coalition for Responsible Investments.
Anna Falkenberg, Socially Responsible Investment Coalition.
Good morning, Sister Nora Nash, Sisters of St. Francis of Philadelphia.
Marie Gaillac, California, Coalition for Responsible Investing.
Sam Jones, Heartland Initiative.
oh, great.
Kate Monahan, Friends Fiduciary. Just put in the chat box that she was on.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, so I want to thank everybody for joining us this morning, either on the phone or here in person. We're very lucky to have with us Ruslan Meatif from Alternative Turkmenistan News. He normally resides in Amsterdam, so the two of us, and along with my colleague Maren and Pat Zarega on the phone, just finished 3 days of lots of meetings in Washington with everyone from the Uzbek government to the US government to the ILO, the IFC, and lots of other conversations in between to talk about forced labor in the cotton supply chains. So I know that many of you over the years and working with me since 2007 on the issue of forced labor in Uzbekistan, and I'll talk very briefly about that later on. But many of you, or most of you, probably are less familiar with what has been going on in Turkmenistan, which is somewhat related to what has been happening in Uzbekistan, both over the last 70 to 80 years. But I'm going to let our expert, Ruslan, go over those details. So with that, I'll actually, oh, we do have an agenda slide, I believe. Here we go. So we just did our introductions, but being able to give all of you a bit more background about Turkmenistan, both the history of it as well as what happened during the 2018 harvest. Then we'll be talking about various actions, the YES initiative, Yarn Ethically and Sustainably Sourced, something I'll go over, specific asks and activities that investors can do, and then we can have a further discussion at the end. We do have a few snacks and coffee. Feel free to help yourself, or that will be available after as well. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Ruslan.
Thank you very much, Patricia. Yeah, I'll do it. Once again, just to introduce myself, my name is Ruslan Meatif. I'm a journalist by training and by profession. And since 2013, my organization, Alternative Turkmenistan News, has been conducting forced labor monitoring in Turkmenistan. I'm from Turkmenistan myself, but due to political climate, I have to live in exile in the Netherlands. The organization that I run is an independent media and human rights initiative dedicated to the promotion of freedom of speech and the rule of law in Turkmenistan. Let me briefly tell you about what this country is like. I hope you can see my slides, those on the phone. This will not only help you understand the situation, but also get a sense of the nature of forced labor in Turkmenistan. As you can see, Turkmenistan is run by this gentleman on the right. His name is Gurbanguly Berdimuhamed. He's the president. He came to power in 2007 after the sudden death of our previous dictator, Saparmurat Niyazov, who had ruled the country for 21 years. The new guy's ruling style is not any different from that of his predecessor, unfortunately. Press freedom in Turkmenistan is non-existent, as you can see on the slide. The most recent ranking that was given by Reporters Without Borders is 178 out of 180 countries in the world. So it's slightly better than North Korea and Eritrea. The same is with economic freedom. Transparency International ranked Turkmenistan very low in its doing business index. And as you may know, Transparency International looks at such indicators as the rule of law, level of corruption in the country, and ease of business registration, etc. Economic freedom is in Turkmenistan is limited. It's the state that fully manages most of the industries, including the cotton industry, starting from its cultivation, processing, and international sales. We'll get to that a bit later. Last but not least, Freedom House. This is actually slightly old information. They just released a new ranking just a few days ago, and Turkmenistan was second from the bottom in terms of freedom in the world. Only letting war-torn Syria ahead. So you can imagine this. Even North Korea was ranked third. Turkmenistan was ranked second. And the lowest that number is, the worse it is. I'm showing you here a few pictures of Turkmen journalists and or activists. I will not stop on each and every one of them, but just would like to highlight two people. This man's name is Mansur Mingilov. He's serving a 22-year prison term for complaining to the president of Turkmenistan about the tortures that he and other members of Balochi community had gone through in the Turkmen drugs police. He collected evidence of torture, the testimonies of people, and complained to the president and to the American embassy in Turkmenistan. And when he was exiting the American embassy, he was rearrested and then given this long prison term. The second person is this gentleman. His name is Casper McAuliffe. I will talk about him later in detail. He, at the end of 2016, he received a 3-year prison term for reporting on forced adult and child labor in the cotton fields of Turkmenistan. He was tortured in detention and was given a term on false charges of fraud and bribery. Lastly, Turkmenistan is often criticized for suppressing religious freedom, even though the country is largely populated by Muslims. In the government's view, those who are a bit too religious, and it's especially young men, are given long prison terms on any charges you can think of: seizure of power, organization of a criminal gang, you name it. And even though the Orthodox Church in Turkmenistan is allowed, for instance, a community of Jehovah's Witnesses is denied registration, and its young male members are given prison terms for refusing to serve in the military, which is against their beliefs. This is in a nutshell about the country in general. I'm switching to a slide on cotton and textile industry. As I said, the government in the country controls all aspects of life: economy, social life, media, everything. Similarly, it controls the entire cotton industry. It starts with the arable lands. The state owns all the lands, and farmers can only lease the land from the state. It's the state that tells the farmers what to grow on those fields, and it's the state that assigns quotas, how much cotton or wheat or rice they should produce. It's the state that supplies the farmers with cotton seeds, with fertilizers, chemicals, and it's the state that then buys all of the cotton from farmers. Farmers are allowed to sell the cotton only to the state at prices established by the state. So it's entirely controlled by the government. The same way, the state owns all gins and spinning mills. Most of textile plants are owned by the state, with a few exceptions of joint Turkmen-Turkish ventures, joint ventures. Though machine harvesting is in place in Turkmenistan, most of the cotton is picked manually, because machine harvesters enter the cotton fields only sometime in late October, early November, when all of the cotton pods have been opened. And before that, the cotton is picked manually. The lands are quite large, and which makes it impossible for farmers individually or even for their families to pick it all without having to apply to forced labor. Therefore, the government sends every year, beginning early September, even sometimes late August, until sometimes mid-December, the government sends tens of thousands of civil servants. By civil servants, I mean those who are employed by the state. It's teachers, it's doctors, it's bank employees. All banks belong to the government. It's different utility services, cleaners, gardeners, you name it. Cotton picking is mandatory even for military personnel, for soldiers. We have this year, last year, 2018, we have received evidence of soldiers being dispatched to cotton fields. And yeah, just like all state civil servants, they also have to pick cotton. You can see here on the picture. I should tell people here and on the phone that these are unique shots from Turkmenistan, given the nature of suppression in the country. The government hates independent monitoring, independent thinking, and it's very hard to obtain such things. But as you see, we managed to do it since 2013. These were just some of the headlines of last year. For civil servants, participation in the cotton harvesting is a must. If they refuse to pick cotton, they are reprimanded. That's the least that the state officials can do. And sometimes often, or in most of the cases, if they refuse, they face dismissal. They will be dismissed. In Turkmenistan, for your information, the unemployment rate is somewhere at around 50%, 50. So for state servants, civil servants, keeping a job is important, and that's why they submit to those illegal and unlawful orders from government officials to pick cotton, because they naturally need to feed their families, etc. However, there is also a system where a civil servant can pay money and find a replacement worker instead of going to pick cotton himself. The pay is about $1 a day. which may sound not so much, but I can tell you that an average salary in Turkmenistan is 50 USD per month, 50. For instance, a kindergarten's nanny gets $45. So for civil servants paying $1 a day, starting from beginning of September until mid-December, means quite a lot of money. Sometimes they have to give up their 2 monthly wages for that, just to be free from the necessity to go pick cotton. Cotton pickers do get paid for every kilogram or pound, however you want to calculate it, that they pick. And the pay is 1 American cent per kilogram. And 1 kilogram is slightly over 2 pounds. So you can imagine 2 pounds of cotton, that's quite a lot because it's light and and they get paid 1 American cent for that. I'm converting for your convenience from the Turkmen currency, which is manat, to USDs. The working conditions and transportation and food supply, this is something that we, our monitors look for. They all work undercover in Turkmenistan because if they are revealed, they'll be in trouble, just like Casper McAuliffe. I'll get to him later. We have been conducting this forced labor monitoring since 2013, and despite the fact that Turkmenistan has signed the ILO conventions, which prohibit forced adult and child labor, people, as you see, civil servants are being forced to pick cotton. You can see from the photos, sometimes they're being transported just like this on the back of a truck, and they meet every morning, early in the morning at 6 or 7 o'clock at the so-called pickup points. Usually it's bus stations or any public places. And the food, it's often as simple as bread and tea or water, because people cannot afford something more nutritious than this. People have to secure their own food and drinks, despite this year it was so funny that the state media reported that cotton pickers were receiving 3 hot meals a day, which is nonsense, because our monitors have visited cotton fields. They even lived, they have taken long-term shifts with cotton pickers. They lived with them in, I don't know, barracks, with no electricity, with no sanitation, no water even to wash hands. But the state media at the same time was reporting about food supply, about field concerts and field libraries. I mean, they should not have said that, because it's completely nonsense. So people, monitors visit the fields, they look at the working conditions, how people are treated, if they have enough rest time, because cotton picking is a hard job. It's physically hard to do so, to pick cotton, and whether they are being paid at the end of the day. In most of the cases they are not, because farmers say, we never invited you here, we never wanted you in our fields, because we can manage on our own, we can pick it ourselves, because it's the farmers that in the end have to pay money to cotton pickers. And the civil servants have basically no choice, because they were sent by their supervisors, by the education department or healthcare department in the city. And on the other hand, farmers don't want them, so they are kind of in between. But as I said, they have to work, even if it's for free sometimes. About child labor, it remains a problem in Turkmenistan despite the ban imposed on child labor by the president in 2008. Throughout 2015, 2016, and 2017, we reported about systemic use of child labor. School children of age 12-16 are sent to cotton fields by orders from the regional education departments, which in turn receive such orders from the regional governors. So you can, we can clearly see this chain of command where the orders come from, and they come from the state because they, as I said, the entire industry is state-run, state orchestrated. Working conditions and picking quotas for children are the same as for adults. It's 50 kilograms a day or 110 pounds. In 2018, however, after much international criticism, our monitors have not observed organized use of child labor when school administrations would massively send children to pick cotton. But it does not mean that children were not sent to pick cotton. I should admit that our monitoring capacities are rather small given the environment in Turkmenistan, but and we physically could not monitor all fields, all districts, and all regions. But in the places which we monitored, we found no child labor in 2018. However, our monitors have seen children working in the fields, but that was the case when they either replaced their family members or went out to earn some pocket money. You can see the photos here. I earlier proposed or promised to talk more about Casper McAuliffe. He was arrested just 2 days after I published his extensive report in 2016, and the report was titled "They transport people in the back of a truck like sheep for sale." And I know from my internal sources that the secret police was furious about that title. I mean, that's the truth. If you can see on the even on the pictures, I mean, this is not the way humans should be transported. And cases of car accidents, we have very bad roads in Turkmenistan. It's unlike here, and sometimes trucks even roll over and people are injured. In one of the slides here, you saw, for instance, the third bus crash injures dozens of cotton pickers. It happened in September, I believe. No, on the 31st of August last year. It was one of the first days when civil servants were forced to pick cotton. So he basically, for this reporting, he suffered, and he suffered significantly. A young man was sent to prison for 3 years, and the funniest thing is that other prison inmates with the same charges were released throughout 2017 and 2018 under the presidential amnesty, but he was not. And that's also an indication that his case is politically motivated. The United Nations Working Group found his deprivation of liberty arbitrary, demanded his immediate release from prison and compensation, but unfortunately it's not a binding order. Turkmenistan is not obliged to fulfill the order immediately. They surely got this message from the UN Working Group, but there was no action taken. Our goal is to eradicate forced adult and child labor in Turkmenistan. However, we are open to work with the government. However, they don't recognize the problem at all. They say there is no forced labor in Turkmenistan. They don't respond to phone calls from the cotton campaign. My organization is part of the cotton campaign. It's a coalition of 40 plus businesses, human rights organizations, business associations, investors, etc. We do reach out to them often on a regular basis. For instance, just Patricia mentioned that we had a 3-day meeting in Washington this past week, and we invited the Turkmen embassy to join the meeting to start a dialogue. They never responded to a phone call, never responded even to an email. And when we met with a high-level delegation from Uzbekistan, I think it was quite high because Vice Prime Minister came over to sit with us around one table. Then I also said that one day the Turkmens will also they will simply have to come and sit with us around one table. And when that happens is a matter of question. And our role in the coalition, my role as Alternative Turkmenistan News, is to make that happen sooner. And I urge you, I'm taking advantage of this opportunity to urge you to join our efforts and our work, and keep and maintain the strong position that you, the companies, the brands, governments are against the use of forced labor in Turkmenistan. That will help a lot, because that's one of the few actually instruments that we have that we can push on the government. And if that happens, we've got already quite many companies and brands on our side. Some of them have publicly taken action. They said that they will not be sourcing cotton or textiles from Turkmenistan. And I'll leave it up to Patricia to continue with the cotton pledge. Thanks. Thank you. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, okay, sure. Let's go ahead and have those on the phone that have not yet introduced themselves. Go ahead and introduce yourselves.
Hi, this is Lauren Compare, Boston Common Asset Management. It's really great to hear sort of really on the ground in country perspectives of what's going on, and we need more information like this to inform our how we're prioritizing this issue.
And this is Nora. I really appreciate your presentation, the actual experience that you have had, that all of these workers on the ground have had. And as Lauren said, the more we know, I think the more we can tune into how we can respond, get our government to respond more actively, and also thank Patricia for all the work that she is doing.
Great, thank you. I actually think we could see if there's specific questions for Ruslan at this point, and then I'll go into the other half of the presentation, but it helps make things more interactive so it's not just all of us talking to you.
Ruslan, this is Pat. When they get paid the penny per pound, are they still getting paid by whatever their job is normally?
Very good question. Yes, they do get paid. They keep their jobs, they keep their salaries, and on top of that, they receive this penny per kilo. Indeed.
This is Patricia, so that therefore they're picking approximately 100 kilos a day, because you were saying they're getting paid $1 a day?
No, they pay $1 a day to hire a replacement worker. They get paid 1 cent per kilogram. So, and frankly, picking 100 kilograms, it was pounds that I mentioned, but it's 50 kilograms. It's a lot of cotton. It's really a lot. I used to go to cotton fields when I was at school under the first dictator of Turkmenistan. Back then, he absolutely did not care about the use of child labor. And we could hardly, in those times when we were young and fresh, we could not collect more than 20, because it's really hard work.
Hi, I'm just curious, how much of the country's population does the civil servants represent approximately? Like how many people?
That's also a very good question. The thing is that in the beginning I mentioned Turkmenistan is a very closed country. It does not release crucial information, information like that, for instance. I can tell you that we don't even know the size of our population, because in 2012, the government held popular census and never released the data, because perhaps because of high migration, and when they really got the real numbers, they simply decided not to release them, because not to scare their own society and people. But I can tell you that since the state is the main employer in Turkmenistan, that number of people would be quite high. I won't give you any numbers, just to be fair. I should also mention here that private businesses are also forced to contribute when it comes when the time comes to pick cotton. For instance, businesses, let's say I own a small shop at a market, I need to contribute either people or money to hire somebody, or provide a bus, my company bus or my shop bus, to transport people into the fields. If I refuse, the next day or next week, somebody from the tax authority will come, or from the fire department, and they'll start the checking. Even if you don't have any problems, they'll find them. And they'll make your life hell, really, that you will say, okay, you know what, it's better to do what they demand, and so that they let me alone.
Thanks so much for this really excellent presentation. We were speaking very briefly before about where you think there's some opportunities for leverage. It seems that, the presence of sort of Western companies is, and so it's hard for me to think, what are the key leverage points that could actually make a difference. So key governments or companies from other countries, from India, from Russia, yeah.
That's a very good question and very broad question. I should say that Turkmenistan at this moment is in a very bad economic shape. Terrible. It has never been like this, even in the early years of Turkmenistan's independence from the Soviet Union. Our main source of income is natural gas. Turkmenistan is the fourth largest gas producers in the world. Then it's followed by oil sales, and the third income generating source is cotton. So at the moment, Turkmenistan is in a very bad economic shape. Our only gas purchaser is China at the moment, but China has invested in the pipeline from Turkmenistan to China, so it's not really paying cash. It's getting gas, but it covers the investments into the pipeline. So what Turkmenistan receives from gas supplies at the moment is far from covering all of the budget lines that it has planned, a year ago. As for the leverage, at the moment, our experience with Responsible Sourcing Network, with some other partners in Europe, it shows that at least in the cotton sector, in the textile sector, refusal to work with the government on that helps. Why am I saying that? In 2018, I think thanks to all that reporting and advocacy and engagement with brands, the government was forced to, maybe forced not a good word in this case, but the government had to respond. What they did, they promised that starting from 2019 harvest, they'll increase the pay for farmers per ton of cotton. They also promised that the cotton pickers will get a pay increase for every kilogram that they collected. Will that make a big difference? No, because the inflation rate is high. We have two currency rates at the moment in Turkmenistan. One is fixed rate, 3.5 manats per dollar, and the market rate is 20 manats per dollar. So it's 5 times more. So even if they increase that pay, the people won't feel it. They won't be able to buy more on the money that they would get. The presence of Western companies at the moment, there is only the presence is rather small. I told you before we started that there is a functioning body. It's called the Turkmen American Business Council, which is composed of government officials from the Turkmen side, government officials from the US side, and some big American names like John Deere, like Case New Holland and Boeing Corporation. Our plane fleet in Turkmenistan is composed of Boeing airplanes, and the machine harvesters that enter the field somewhere at the end of October, early November, are American-produced machines. So that's about it, because there are no big ties with Western world. There are no economic ties with the European Union because there is no trade agreement. The EU has continuously refused to sign that trade agreement with Turkmenistan precisely because of the human rights situation in the country. So the main trade partners are the countries that care less about human rights in Turkmenistan, which is Russia, which is China, which is the Arab world, India, etc. So it's the East, not the West.
Does anyone on the call have questions for Ruslan?
I have a question. What would you suggest that we can do, or maybe you're going to get into this next, but that we to be helpful in solving or combating this obviously significant issue?
Well, as I said, and I want to actually stop on this slide that I have here, but I'll answer your question first. It's hard to say what can be done. I think helping us to push on the government on this matter would be helpful, and by that I mean joining the Cotton Campaign Responsible Sourcing Network in joining the Turkmen Cotton Pledge. It's really important because being public about that, okay, it's good, but it's not helpful unless they feel it, that they receive less money. Only then they can really understand that they gotta change something, because otherwise it's simply collapsing. Turkmenistan has built state-of-the-art textile plants. It is capable of producing high-quality bed linen. IKEA was buying from them. We engaged with IKEA 2 years ago, I think. We found bed sheets made in Turkmenistan and bearing IKEA brand logo on it. We went to Sweden, we spoke with them, we said, look, this is simply not acceptable because of forced labor in the country. They even had independent auditors who visited Turkmenistan and allegedly found no problem of forced labor. But yet IKEA stood with us. They said, okay, we're selling the stock, what we have already, and we're not going to be dealing with them anymore. That was a very strong position, and I urge investors, I urge companies to do the same, because the more companies we get, I think, Patricia, you showed that slide, I have it. Okay, I won't tell the secret then. But on the more companies we get on a roll, the sooner the problem will be solved. That's I absolutely believe it. And this last slide, you can see, I don't know if it's very visible, but you see a few big names here. And for instance, Levi's jeans, and it says made in Turkmenistan. These photos were made in Turkmenistan on a Turkmen market. It seems to me that when all these companies refused to buy textiles and jeans, the government simply dumped all the stock that they have already produced onto the local market. And these jeans were sold at $1 per pair. And people were quite happy because they could at least, once in their life, could wear quality jeans for very little money. Yeah, and we would see, I have more photos, but not on this slide, but we would see really piles of jeans sold right next to carrots and melons on a market, and people would be buying them.
any additional questions on the phone before we move on to the next portion of the presentation?
Could I ask you a question? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. One first person. Who's that? Tom? Sam?
I'll go. Yeah, I wondered if you could speak about, you mentioned that most of the cotton is going to the east and the countries that are buying it, but what form is it going? Is it going as raw cotton, or is it being woven into textiles or made into full garments before it's exported? What's the breakdown in terms of what form the cotton is taking before it leaves the country and where it's going?
When I mentioned the engagement with the East, I meant not only cotton but also other trade forms. But according to the data that we have, around 70% of Turkmen cotton is processed in Turkmenistan, because, as I said, Turkmenistan has several dozens of really state-of-the-art textile plants, which is capable of producing towels, bed linen, etc. The rest of the cotton is going mostly to Turkey and to countries like Bangladesh and Pakistan. We did some media research. We checked the official state media in Turkmenistan, and we found that there were three Swiss cotton traders represented in Turkmenistan. They have rather smaller names. I can tell you who they are when I find, but there was also one Singaporean, which is called Olam International. And
Olam.
Yes. They have an office in Ashgabat, the capital of Turkmenistan, and in 2016, they were, according to the state media, they were the largest cotton buyers in Turkmenistan. There is also, as I mentioned, a Turkish company. It's called Çalik Cotton, named after the founder of that company, well-known Turkish businessman Ahmet Çalik. So it goes there.
Yeah, this is Lauren. Thanks for clarifying that. I actually think, Patricia, that really hones in on where investor leverage can be applied. Olam is a public traded company. I think still we invested in it at some point. So having sort of a Daiwa kind of focus with Olam would be good in terms of what we did with Uzbek. I do think it would be helpful to have kind of a chart, an infographic, which shows 70% goes to these countries and focus then on the 30% that's kind of the raw cotton versus processed, because I think the interventions are quite different when it's finished products, right? So who's buying those products primarily in terms of the 70% of the cotton? Do we have a sense of that?
Unfortunately not. As I said, Turkmenistan does not release this information. What we know is based on either state reports, which really come out very seldom. They don't like to release it so that we cannot use it then in our work, obviously. But the 70% versus 30% is a rough indication. It's not officially confirmed. This information comes from people who work there, but we have not seen the paper. We haven't seen it on paper. But it's a good idea about the infographic. I'll definitely fix it. One last thing about Olam is that in this media research that we did, we found that they were present in Turkmenistan at least since 2006. So it's been quite many years now that they are represented in the country, and obviously by Turkmen cotton.
So it's interesting, Lauren. This is Patricia. I was just looking online here during Ruslan's comments, because we did discuss Olam earlier this week, and so I went to their website because I did meet with them in London in November. And they're like, oh yeah, we're not sourcing from Uzbekistan anymore, because Lauren and I had started the conversation with Olam probably 8 years ago.
Yeah, on Uzbek cotton, exactly.
But listen, I just went to their website and it says, Commonwealth of Independent States, CIS, which is all the former Soviet countries. And it says our main focus in Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan, and Tajikistan is sourcing and exporting cotton. So they're very clear on their website that from Turkmenistan, but wait, there's more. Then I went because we already started looking at this in regards to their for Uzbek cotton, or just for forced labor and cotton in general because of the UK Modern Slavery Act. And so they have a statement on their website for UK Modern Slavery Act that says, we are committed to maintaining our work as a global leader in many food and industrial raw material businesses and engaging with others, including suppliers, to eliminate abuses in the labor markets where we operate or have influence. So it says the Olam Group of companies has zero tolerance for slavery or human trafficking in its organization and industry. And then further on, it says in regards to its relevant policies, it lists out its code of conduct, its supplier code. It says we already have a number of policies in place. We're reviewing these to improve upon them. And it says our initiatives require us to mitigate the risk of slavery or human trafficking occurring in our business or any of its supply chains. So in my opinion, it's quite clear that here's a direct contradictory position where they say
absolutely.
that they have no tolerance for slavery, yet they're front and center clear that they're sourcing from Turkmenistan.
Yeah, if we even focused, Patricia, our efforts on the misalignment or lack of implementation of stated policies, I think Olam should be a kind of a very high focused intervention, and probably one of the most impactful we could have. Given how we're, the rest of it's a bit murky in terms of the processed cotton, where the processed product goes.
Well, and what Ruslan hadn't said, and I'm going to go into this in a moment, but in regards to different leverage points, and I know Paloma, you were asking about this too, because how we've addressed the whole issue of really taking steps to eliminate and eradicate forced labor in the Uzbek cotton supply chain, that we started in general campaigning on that issue in 2007. We have taken a multi-strategy approach of complaints through the ILO, complaints to the World Bank and IFC for giving loans, bilateral negotiations between both U.S. and other governments and the Uzbek government, and in this case, we can really try with the Turkmen government. The cotton pledges of brands and retailers not to source Uzbek cotton. So, and now we've started the pledge, and I'll go over that in a minute, not to source Turkmenistan cotton. And a complaint to the Customs and Border Protection Agency of the United States, because the U.S. does have laws not to import any cotton or cotton product, so the complaint was against CBP not to import any products with forced labor in them. So ILRF, the International Labor Rights Forum, filed this complaint with CBP saying, well, what about Turkmenistan? We have all this evidence of forced labor in Turkmenistan's cotton industry. So it was unprecedented, but the CBP issued a withhold and release order last year saying any cotton or cotton product with Turkmen cotton could be held at the border, right? And I was just speaking at a customs compliance meeting last week at Levi's in San Francisco for the U.S. Fashion Industry Association. And, they're constantly talking about all the U.S. regulation of bringing product into the U.S., with forced labor being one of the highest risk areas. And I've also heard of one brand who's already been audited they have to prove their innocence to CBP that they're not using product with forced labor. And Ruslan was talking about the joint ventures, and I think it really is important to look and see especially there's a very big relationship between Turkey and Turkmenistan. There's this really great website. If you guys haven't seen it, I have it on my computer. Maybe we could pull it up on the screen in a minute, through MIT, about imports and exports. And you can look up any country for both what they import or export. And so if you can drill down to cotton, and it says 74% of the exports of Turkmenistan's cotton are going to Turkey, right? And that's a huge risk for European brands in particular, but there is a lot of production going on in Turkey right now. I mean, I was there last year, last year and the year before, visiting spinning mills. I saw Turkmenistan cotton in a spinning mill that told us they didn't have it. There's, IKEA does huge production, miles and miles of sheeting. Like, these factories are enormous. And because of the close proximity to Europe and being able to bring product in, there's a huge risk of, I think, Turkmenistan cotton going to Turkey. And then the joint ventures of production of both yarn, textile, and apparel, or home goods, between Turkish companies and Turkmenistan companies. And one of the big questions we were also asking the spinners is, how do you know that the cotton you're purchasing is actually Turkish cotton, not somebody bringing trucks over the border with Turkmenistan cotton? The other thing, go ahead.
Oh, just before we go too far, there's Susan, you had a question for Ruslan?
Go ahead.
Hi, this is Susan Baker. Thank you for this presentation. Sorry to join late. I had a question about the story I heard about IKEA. We've been talking to some small manufacturers, brands, and you mentioned that the independent auditor was not aware of this issue. So I'm curious if what's happening in the process of training auditors. Is there leverage for investors to ask tougher questions to brands about the auditing process, the remediation, the effectiveness of the trainings that are happening?
Yeah, and I had a follow-up question, maybe just to add to that. Have you used the UK modern slavery disclosure to maybe also identify some of the retail brands who might have that sort of gap that Susan's alluding to?
Great questions. I'm going to hold off on your question, Lauren, because the second half of this presentation is all exactly about that. I'll let Ruslan speak to what IKEA told them in regards to why their auditors, weren't able to see forced labor, and then I'll give my opinion on that, though I didn't have that direct conversation with IKEA. Ruslan did.
IKEA wasn't actually very outspoken on that. They simply mentioned that they had international independent auditors, but and they left it just like that. I come from Turkmenistan, and I work with the country on a daily basis. I know how these auditor missions are taking place. There's a good word in Russian. It's called Potemkin village. I don't know if that makes any sense in English, but basically you stage a place. You create very nice conditions for a certain mission. Like you create nice. You show the people, the international auditors. You show the cotton fields where machine harvesters are working, and they're not allowed to see anything else. It's not like they have independence to theater. There you go. I kind of have a feeling. I don't know for sure. Trust me, but I kind of have a feeling that was one of the reasons that they did not observe forced labor in Turkmenistan. Also, what IKEA said is that they had developed a training program with Turkmen farmers to educate them on how to, manage it so that there is no forced labor involved. But my feeling is that if IKEA has refused perhaps they also challenged the findings of their independent monitoring. One last thing before we turn to Patricia. I told you that we do media research and we also look at annual reports of different companies. And I mentioned before that there was a Turkish buyer, Turkish cotton trader, Çalık Cotton. In their 2015 annual report, they said, steadily expanding its business volume, Çalık Cotton purchased 48,000 tons of cotton from Turkmenistan in 2015. That is for your information. Also, about the other cotton traders, I mentioned 3 Swiss companies, and they are Paul Reinhardt, Carvon Commodities, and Rizana Trading CA. So these 3 Swiss companies, Olam International was Singaporean, and Çalık Pamuk, Çalık Cotton from Turkey. These are 5 known cotton traders that work in Turkmenistan up until today.
Okay.
And I'll just
Thank you.
build on that.
Sorry, could I just ask a question on the cotton traders? I don't think all of those are public, correct? I think Olam is public, and I'm not sure about the others because I don't have the list of names in front of me. Patricia, do you have a sense of which are public and which are not? Hello?
Sorry, I was on mute. We'll look into those, Lauren, to find out if any of them are publicly traded or publicly traded in the U.S. Since Çalık is a Turkish company, it might be public in Turkey. But my understanding from all the trader engagement we did previously for Uzbekistan is that Olam is the only publicly traded one. Cargill, which is also quite large, as many of you know, probably from engaging them on a whole bunch of palm oil and cocoa and other issues, is that they are privately held, unfortunately. That said, you know, there's still ways to engage them. They also have a UK Modern Slavery Act statement on their website. And we are planning on just engaging traders in much more detail going forward with the YES initiative, which I'll talk about in a moment. My other conversations with IKEA is that they have been doing auditing of their own spinning mills in regards to where they're sourcing cotton from. I hadn't heard that they were doing any training with farmers, but you know, that Susan might be another reason why they didn't find anything wrong, is because, you know, if they're not going to the cotton fields, if, you know, it's kind of our same old of the brands and retailers having codes of conduct or trying to take action at their first tier supply chain, and as you drill down, they're not engaging the second, third, fourth tiers of the supply chain. So, which is also what YES is trying to get at. Before I talk more about this new initiative, YES, yarn ethically and sustainably sourced, which is focused on the spinning mill portion of the supply chain, I just wanted to give folks a little bit more background on the cotton campaign, since maybe you haven't engaged there like some of the other investors that we've been talking to. But we launched the Uzbek Cotton Pledge in 2011. We did start engaging brands and retailers as early as 2008, 2007 is when a lot of the reports on Uzbekistan and forced child labor were coming out. And what we were asking the brands to do is to sign a pledge saying that they do not knowingly source cotton from Uzbekistan. And it was a very high level pledge. We didn't have any way to enforce it. And we asked them, we have a list of next steps and how they could talk to their suppliers and put it into contracts, etc. And when we first started it, a lot of people are like, well, it's a super weak pledge, that's not going to make any difference. Well, it has. So the graphic that you could see is how the Uzbek exports have decreased significantly over the last 7, 8 years. And I mean, there's probably a number of reasons for it, but I think what's really important is that we had our first delegation go to Uzbekistan in May of last year, and as Ruslan said, it was the Deputy Prime Minister and the Labor Minister who both traveled to Washington, D.C. to meet with the Cotton Campaign just earlier this week on Monday. And all they could talk about is, when are you going to sunset the pledge? Like, when are you going to end the boycott? I actually heard from traders that banks will not give letters of credit for Uzbek cotton now. And they are looking to build up their own internal industry. I think a lot of that is because they're having a lot of difficulty selling their cotton internationally now. So even though the pledge is pretty high level and kind of vague, if the companies, and it's voluntary, but if companies are really willing to push that through their supply chain, then it can have the significant economic leverage on the company, on the country, on the governments, as we just heard from Ruslan, that are calling the shots and control the entire industry. And what the U.S. government told us earlier this week is that it's been the multi-sector strategic approach of the campaign that's had the most impact on the Uzbek government, and why they are now coming to the table. The president in 2017 in Uzbekistan said in front of the United Nations, we are going to end forced labor in our country. They're looking to us to find out exactly what they should be doing to actually demonstrate that they're ending it and that it's irreversible. And so I'll be going into that in a second. But we heard over and over that it's the economic leverage together with the government conversations and complaints, et cetera, that has really made the difference in Uzbekistan. And we know that the Turkmens are not answering emails, they're not answering phone calls. We ask them to meet and to dialogue, nothing. Like, the only thing that I think is really going to make a difference with that government is economic pressure and reputational harm. I mean, and they already have a terrible reputation in the world, right? They're like, nobody doubts it. In fact, people say that Uzbekistan looks like nirvana compared to Turkmenistan. I mean, I've had some very big industrial, people who are just concerned about selling as much cotton in the world as possible say that Turkmenistan's a hellhole and that they'd never want to go back. It's so terrible. And so I think that, this is our opportunity to put pressure on them. I think Olam is a great focus point, because they're buying cotton directly from Turkmenistan. So I do think that's a big one. So just to let you know how a lot of brands, I want to commend all the brands and retailers that have joined with the cotton campaign. The Uzbek pledge, which I mentioned we started in 2011, now has over 300 signatories to that pledge, and we're getting more. Actually, just last week we had a couple more Australian brands sign the pledge. It shows you the legislation, the anti-slavery legislation works, and that these companies are taking action, especially if they have to report year in, year out. And that gives us transparency now, those disclosures like this with Olam, that says that they're committed to ending and taking action to ending and ensuring they have no slavery in their supply chains, yet, they're buying from Turkmenistan. So, what we're asking brands to do at this point is to stick with us with the Uzbek pledge. And that's a strong message, because we do have specific steps that we want the Uzbeks to take before we sunset that pledge. But now with the Turkmenistan pledge, we just launched that earlier this year, and we already have 61 signatories of brands and retailers that have signed it. So we are asking brands to sign the pledge if they haven't yet. Also, the opportunity to work through USCIB, the Council of International Business, which is the employer arm of the ILO, to file complaints with the ILO. I think that is a strategy that we really haven't explored in enough detail yet for Turkmenistan, as well as these brands in different countries, whether it be Japan or UK or Europe, et cetera, that their home governments could push the Turkmen government to do more. And so if you're looking like for more detail, for example, what we're asking the Uzbeks to do is to have this verification that systemic forced labor has ended, that we're not seeing where the government is actually asking, like at factories, thousands of workers from factories, military personnel, et cetera, going to the fields, that they implement structural reforms to end forced labor, as well as we need a vibrant civil society and media to be reporting on what's going on. So Ruslan mentioned that Casper he's going on his third year in jail for reporting on the issue. We still have undercover monitors in Uzbekistan, and the public ones were harassed during the last season. So we're not too anxious to sunset the pledge too soon. We want to see what happens in 2019 if they actually implement these steps. We're looking for them. And we want independent monitors telling us what's going on. So, basically, I think the engagement that we've had with Uzbekistan is, 10 years advanced from where Turkmenistan is. We're hoping it's not going to take over 10 years to get Turkmenistan to start to turn this around, and hopefully they, in another year or two, we'd like to hold up Uzbekistan and say, look, it's taken us a while, but it's worked, and there's Western markets open to you now because you've taken steps to eradicate slavery in your cotton industry. And so we'd like to really have that be an example then that Turkmenistan could do the same. I mentioned this new initiative, that Responsible Sourcing Network. It's probably why you haven't seen me so much in a lot of the investor engagements at ICCR and others, is because I've had my head down really trying to get this initiative off the ground, which we call YES, a nice positive acronym that is focused on eradicating slavery in the cotton supply chain globally using ILO Convention 29. We've identified 9 countries that have forced labor in their cotton industries. Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan, it's state orchestrated forced labor, whereas in the other countries, it's not as top down, which is probably going to make it harder to eradicate, but using a due diligence approach, we feel that this could happen. We're taking a lot of advice and lessons learned from the conflict minerals work and the efforts that have been put in place by Responsible Minerals Initiative to verify and ensure that refiners and smelters are implementing a due diligence approach, that if they're sourcing conflict minerals from the Democratic Republic of Congo, neighboring countries, other high-risk regions, that they're ensuring they're coming from conflict-free mines. So the way to go about this is training and verifying that yarn spinning mills are implementing a due diligence program. So it is a verification or an assessment of what they're doing. It's not like a typical audit where it's just to check the box. It's more of a conversation about their policies and procedures and showing continuous improvement. It's also focused on the highest risk areas first. And so knowing that forced labor is ubiquitous throughout Turkmenistan, and that there are no initiatives like Fair Trade or Better Cotton Initiative or anything, like doesn't even come close to that in Turkmenistan. Basically, Turkmenistan cotton is off the table, like unless you could actually prove that you're sourcing it in a responsible manner, which is not the case. The biggest issue with cotton yarn spinners is that we see them as a key control point throughout, or a choke point in the supply chain. And that's because of this image on the right, which is how a spinning mill lays down bales of cotton, typically from many countries. And it's like a checkerboard, and they have a formula, and that these, and what they're trying to do is have the best quality possible for the cheapest cost, because their profit margins are just tiny. And so they mix all this cotton from different countries all together in one place, and then it's all skimmed off the top and shot through a variety of tubes and combing and carding and refining and then spinning. So you lose traceability to farm or country of origin at this point in the supply chain. So using the due diligence approach that the OECD has issued for the garment and footwear industry, I actually go to Paris next week for the annual meeting that they have, but it's that concept of having policies and management systems, identifying and addressing harm, seize, prevent, or mitigate that harm. You want to be tracking your performance and communicating and reporting out what you're doing, and then providing remediation where appropriate. So it's very much aligned, and they specifically align all the OECD due diligence to support, mutually support the UN guiding principles and what companies are being asked there in regards to protecting and respecting human rights. You know, we think that, and this is a conversation, I've had this in the back of my head for years, but because of the political context, I think all the new legislation that's been coming on board for anti-slavery efforts, I mentioned the CBP withhold release order for Turkmenistan. We also have Sustainable Development Goal 8 and Indicator 8.7 focused on forced labor. There's a lot more collaboration happening within the industry, the Sustainable Apparel Coalition, as well as the Social Labor Convergence Project. There's a lot more media coverage on slavery, and there's new technologies and coming out that are giving more transparency to the supply chain. So my friend Liz, who put this slide together, calls it a supply web, not a supply chain, because of the complexity and difficulty of it. For simplicity's sake, I use an image that's a little more digestible for folks, but you know, there are a lot of efforts that brands are doing at the manufacturing level, as well as at farm level. I mentioned fair trade and these other efforts, Cotton Made in Africa or Better Cotton Initiative, but there's very little engagement with yarn spinners or traders, which is where Olam sits, and even ginners, where they're taking the seeds out of the cotton fleece. And so we're starting with the spinners due to that image I showed you earlier about mixing all the cotton together. What we've been doing at Responsible Sourcing Network is researching the industry. We went to Turkey, Bangladesh, and India in 2016, and we drafted a standard that was out for public comment last year. We then took that standard with those comments to Bangladesh, Turkey, and Uzbekistan in the fall of last year to test it with those spinning mills. And in Uzbekistan, we went there because there is a pilot project with farms, and we wanted to see if you could trace that cotton from those project farms through to the spinning mill or through to point of export, which it is possible, but again, at the spinning mill, they're blending it together with all kinds of cotton that's not from the project farm. So, but eventually, if we could build up, you know, the responsible cotton and know that the spinning mills are only sourcing responsible or low risk cotton, then we feel that there is no forced labor in that yarn. So we're going to be actually launching our, and I think we actually had an update to this slide, but we're launching our standard for Yes March 20th. So coming up, we'll do a webinar for that. We'll put out a save the date in the very near future. We're now raising money to take that standard and build a program around it, because we need brand support and industry support. We need support from the cotton traders, everyone to get on board, similar to the Conflict Minerals Initiative. Because the idea is that we manage this centrally so that the spinning mills don't have to go through multiple audits per year like they do at the garment factory level currently, though the Social Labor Convergence Project is looking to actually converge all of that and streamline it so you don't have audit fatigue happening with the spinning mills. We also need to train the auditors because we're expecting the auditors that are already out in the industry, Control Union or SES, et cetera, those that are auditing the conflict minerals smelters, for example, could be trained to audit the yarn spinners. We're also looking to strengthen and formalize our partnerships with cotton and apparel initiatives such as the Sustainable Apparel Coalition, Better Cotton Initiative, Social Labor Convergence Project. RSN is a member of all three of those efforts and organizations. So we're engaging with them, but we need, really that brands are also higher paying members than we are. So those initiatives usually listen to their brands a bit more. With our future activities, we'd then like to build the steering group and create a YES membership, because if companies are paying, I don't know, $10,000 to $25,000 a year to have this all managed for them, and we can centrally manage it, it's going to be a lot cheaper and more effective and efficient than if every brand is trying to do this on their own. And this coming year, besides building this program, training auditors, we then want to pilot the YES with auditors in a variety of countries. And I've been talking to we had several brands join us at the meetings in DC this week, and talking to them, I think that Turkey and Turkmenistan cotton is a key point for all these brands because of the withhold release order from CBP. So I think even if we try to phase this in over time, which is likely going to have to happen with those 9 countries, because if you add up the amount of cotton that those 9 countries produce in the world, it's like 65% of all cotton produced. So China and India, I think brands are not going to be ready to, and we're not saying boycott the whole country. We're saying if you source from one of those high-risk countries, then you need additional due diligence. Then you need to know that the cotton's coming through Better Cotton Initiative or Cotton Made in Africa. We ourselves actually need to make sure that those on-the-ground farmer-led initiatives are credible, that we feel that if it is a BCI licensed farm, do we feel like it really is addressing forced labor? And the project in Uzbekistan, there's a pilot project going on where they're trying to replicate those BCI, meet all the BCI principles and criteria, which include decent work. And I'm seeing their assurance process. So it's giving me a lot more clarity as to where it's weak and where it needs to be strengthened, especially for forced labor. In my opinion, there's like one indicator for forced labor. You have like 3 indicators for discrimination. And it's like, all right, we really need to beef this up. I think BCI has done a really good job of improving production practices so that farmers can increase their yields and earn more money, which is great. And that the soil is healthy, which is also really important to minimize water. But if they don't have strong, decent work requirements in their standard, then we really need to address that. Okay, so investor engagement. I know all of you were asking about that before, just really very high level, the risks as well as the results that companies can achieve by participating not only with YES, but in engaging companies on this issue, is to be able to address the forced labor and the legislation complying with the regulations, but it's also reputational and material harm. If cotton is held at the border because there's the understanding or possibility that it has the Turkmenistan cotton in it, that's a huge loss for companies, financial, and who had to be audited. They have to prove their innocence. And there can be, I am actually talking to CBP about it in more detail, but there can be legal action taken against companies. So it's not just that they have to ship that product back, but if there's additional fines that they're gonna have to pay, that's another material risk for a brand or a retailer not to address this issue. We have started an investor statement that you can all sign, and we'll continue to circulate that around. We held off putting that in a press release last fall when the Turkmenistan president was visiting the UN, because we wanted to make sure the AUM listed was significant. But I think, is it till the end of February? What we want to do is really do a push right now. I think the timing was not right last year as well. It was like during PRI or something. A lot of people were traveling and had other distractions. So we want to give investors plenty of time to circulate it internally. I know sometimes you have to kind of jump through some hoops to add your names. But we have a link here to the Google statement. It's also, we have it on our website or we should make sure it's front and center on our website, that investors can sign it, and we'll collect signatures through the end of February. We don't, there's not a specific activity like why we need to get this out by a certain time. So we have some flexibility in trying to, keep it open a little longer if necessary, but it'd be great if the Investor Alliance for Human Rights could circulate that, and through Shift Network. I know, Lauren, you have a lot of international connections with investor communities as well as PRI. I know we invited Carol today, but I think she was, I don't know if she's on leave at the moment.
I think she is.
My organization is also a PRI member, so we'd really like to push it out through that community, and as well as US CIF. So if any of you also have ideas on how to increase investor signature, and then that investor statement can be used as we engage more brands and ask them to sign the pledge as well as join Yes. We just circulated here internally a list of investor talking points, and Maren will forward that to everybody on the call, and as well as have that available on our website. So if you're engaging any brands or retailers in your day-to-day dialogues, then you could bring those talking points in. And then with the most recent reminder for this meeting, we talked about an op-ed that was produced in the Thomson Reuters Foundation website, which has a focus on eBay, Amazon, and Walmart, because they were selling towels made in Turkmenistan with the advertisement made in Turkmenistan. It was actually something that the International Labor Rights Forum took that forward to CBP and said, can we hold these companies accountable? But they said, since they're not private label, they're a third party manufacturers, that they couldn't hold eBay, Amazon, and Walmart accountable for that. However, I think Amazon, I was told, did pull the towels off the website, but that eBay hasn't made, but Amazon hasn't actually made a statement about it. We'd really like to hear them. We'd like to hear feedback from them about what they're going to do or have in their own internal policy that they won't allow any product from Turkmenistan in the future, as well as I know that we could bring this up with Walmart, and I forwarded this to Sister Barbara so that she could bring it forth to Walmart. Then the specific asks for companies, as we said, sign the Turkmen Pledge. We're asking them to implement responsible sourcing policies and procedures. On RSN's website, where we have the Turkmen Pledge, we have a couple of links of resources. We have next steps and further detail that we're providing brands. We're happy to get on a call with them. We have a lot of experience now going through all of this with Uzbekistan over the last decade, so we can take all those lessons learned forward for Turkmenistan. And it's really cascading that due diligence at each level of the supply chain. I'm going to be presenting on Yes at the OECD, as I mentioned, but the concept of due diligence is that each tier of the supply chain take responsibility for managing its own suppliers and materials coming in. So that's where we're asking companies to pass that policy down and ask their suppliers even to implement their own policies. For Yes specifically, we're asking companies to contribute financially to get that off the ground. We have, we're opening up the steering committees so that we can talk about how to implement this, as well as the ability for them to nominate their own spinning mills for piloting this fall. So there's mine and Ruslan's emails and contact information. We can continue the conversation if you have to jump off. Understandable, but I think we have a few more minutes, or actually we're close to the end of the hour, but why don't we see if there's any questions before we then go and stop the recording.
Yeah, Patricia, it's Lauren. I was specifically focused on sort of the investor asks, and I think that if there was a little bit more formality around the list of companies that we would share this with, I think we might get more European investor attraction. I think having a more formal list of companies that we would share the investor statement with, and that would encourage dialogue. I think a more formal kind of investor initiative around that, where investors can plug and play, would be important. And whether that's Paloma helping with that, or a small number of us who have been doing this anyway, I think could be helpful. If sort of pick your 10 or 15 or 20 most relevant companies by sector. I think that would be really helpful.
So Lauren, did you say a list of investors we want to engage, or a list of brands?
No, a list of brands, a list of companies where we would be sharing this and asking for a formal discussion. And I think including Amazon, Walmart, and eBay is important. I think having Olam on that list, and then any of the brands you think where there's potential exposure.
Great.
And I'm happy to offline talk with you more about that.
Department of Labor's TVPRA list useful in assessing high-risk countries based on forced child labor in the cotton industry. Has DOL been engaged in this work campaign? Thanks. All right. Well, as a matter of fact, Sam, they have. We met with DOL yesterday and talked to them about their TVPRA list because with our YES initiative, the way we identified those 9 high-risk countries was we first went to the bibliography of the TVPRA list. Actually, in the first iteration of the standard, we just used the DOL list, and some people felt that it was a little too U.S.-centric since it is a global initiative, and so they wanted to, make sure, have us expand the methodology. So we did that this past summer, and we did that and used the ILO's Convention 29 and 105 and as well as the report Hard to See, Harder to Count, Forced Labor Indicators, and then looked at the research and based on the evidence, if they had 3 or more of the indicators, then we put them on our list. And it was quite consistent with the DOL list, only we also added India due to the bonded labor situation there.
Patricia, one of the things that we heard from ISS and Glass Lewis this week was around materiality and actually being able to put some numbers. On the hold and release, is there an ability to even do a case study to put some numbers behind that as to how much it would cost a company? Kind of the business case.
I actually have friends who used to work in logistics at Gap. So I think what I could do is try to reach out to them, because it's not only the price of the manufacturing of the product that are in those containers that come over on the ship, it's then also the transportation expenses. And if the company can't prove its innocence, then they have to ship the product back or it's destroyed. So I think, it's going to depend what is the product. I mean, we could probably do some sort of average of, okay, let's say these are towels, since we know that towels, for example, I think that other thing with eBay and Walmart and Amazon is that they couldn't prove when those towels were imported, if they were imported before that withhold release or after, was another aspect of why they said they had minimal leverage at that moment with those towels. But I think if we could say, okay, how many towels fit in a container? What's the value of that container? What's the expense of the shipment, right? Then you could have some estimated quantities there. And then the other aspect I mentioned is where companies have to prove their innocence. You have all the legal fees and expenses and lawyer costs of what it takes that legal team to sift through all the paperwork and try to prove their innocence. You know, so I think in that we could try to start breaking it down, maybe get a grad student or somebody to come up with the materiality impact.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful. My other question is, some work in some of our organizations is based around violence, and maybe it's a question for Ruslan as to how would you define violence in the country around this issue, if any? Well, some of the work we get engaged in things because there's violence and that conflict in that country going on, and just wondering how that gets defined there. Is there any violence around the cotton campaign or cotton picking?
In general, there's no violence in Turkmenistan. It's a peaceful land. If we talk about cotton harvesting and violence there, well, as I said, our monitoring capacities are not that large, unfortunately. But
so it would be more repression than actual violence.
It is repression and basically punishment for refusal. Is that violence? Well, in a sense, yes.
It helps us to
Are they
train.
thrown in jail? That one image you had of the woman with the bruises on her arm.
No, she's a freelance reporter. She suffered because of reporting on issues including forced labor monitoring, actually.
But she suffered in jail. They
No.
tortured her?
She was not jailed. From that slide, I think only out of 7 people, I think there were 4 were in prison. She was not. She was simply attacked on the street to prevent her to report. And she's 70 years old.
I think some of it is fear, you know, or how much violence they've used in the past, that if they then use that fear of violence or prison, and I don't know how the prison conditions are there. I know that was always a big issue in Uzbekistan as well. It's like thousands of political prisoners.
Same in Turkmenistan.
Yeah.
But one of the previous comments about any other brands that could be risky, I pulled up here a website. It's not on the screen, but it is called Gap Pazarlama. It's not the Gap Inc. It doesn't belong to that. Gap Pazarlama is a subsidiary of Çalik Holding, the company that I mentioned already. I could not find it right now, but I know that in one of their annual reports, they said that H&M was one of their biggest clients. At the same time, they say on their website that most of the textiles and cotton that they sell is made in Turkmenistan. Yet the third part of it is that H&M was one of the pioneers to join the pledge. So what I'm getting at is that despite the fact that a brand signed the pledge, it could still have the risk of having Turkmen cotton or traces of Turkmen cotton or Turkmen textile in their stores. So just for your information.
I also know some of the folks on the phone have some specific companies that we've been engaged with. Susan and I talked to Target. I talked to what's left of Sears. Frank, I think you do Macy's. Maybe if we would send you a list of the companies that we have regular engagements with, could you give us even extra talking points if they've signed the pledge? What should the questions be back to the company?
Well, and I can tell you I've had recent dialogue with Target in particular, and they have decided not to sign the pledge. Although they do have, and I believe it is on their own website, I'd have to double check, saying they will not source Turkmenistan cotton. And there was a representative of Target on the phone participating in the brand meeting on Tuesday afternoon in DC. So I could look at the exact language they used, their excuse as to why they didn't sign it. But to me, and I think sometimes, Costco didn't sign the Uzbek pledge for many years. Finally, there was a shareholder resolution filed with them to sign the pledge, and they said, okay, we'll sign it, will you withdraw? And so the guy withdrew, and they did sign it, but their excuse was, well, we just don't sign public pledges, right? But, and I think with, corporate human rights benchmark, Costco also scored quite low. And I think, it really is a message to brands and retailers that if they're not transparent, they don't disclose that they score lower, that they need to be putting on their public website what they're doing and give people assurance. I believe that Costco is a really great company. I don't doubt that. But if they're not willing to say it, and then the other thing in regards to the pledge and what we said on Uzbekistan, and we can see clearly that the pledge has impact, is it's having everything in one place, being able to demonstrate to the Turkmen government that 60, 100, 200, brands and retailers think that this is unacceptable and that we will do our best to send the message through our supply chain and boycott your cotton until you stop forcing your citizens to work, has an impact. It's taken us, 11, 12 years for Uzbekistan, but it's all we're hearing now is they want the pledge to be sunsetted. So I'll send that, and having, I think, that graphic to share with Target, or, really building the business case as to why Target and others should sign the public pledge, not just have their own internal, I think is important. And maybe we could even adjust these investor talking points to pull that in. The other argument, people say, oh, well, if you're boycotting, isn't it going to hurt the farmers, right? And I could have Ruslan speak to this, but, these farmers are, they don't own their land. They don't make their decisions. If they don't do what the government tells them to, they could lose their farms. They could be harassed. So it's, we've been asked by the local community to have this boycott, to put this pressure on to change the situation. And we had a couple of Uzbeks join us, as well as another journalist for Turkmenistan, but making sure that even, the locals understand the leverage and the pressure that we're putting on, where in the end it will be better for them. Did you want to comment more about, that the comment of the negative impacts of a boycott?
As for farmers, I can say that they have, I told you in the beginning that they can grow either wheat or cotton or rice, and that they really have the choice. So if it's not cotton, if they know that they're not going to be paid by the state for the cotton that they delivered, they would grow wheat. Wheat is always in high demand in Turkmenistan. It even tries to export some, but I don't think it will be very harmful to the farmers. At the same time, I interact with people, and some Turkmen contacts of mine told me that it might affect the factory workers, those who work in the textile plants or ginneries or elsewhere, that it might hurt them. Well, it's ultimately the state that should really make the choice whether they continue, whether they listen to us and engage with us, or they find other markets to sell this cotton or textiles. Yes, there is potentially a risk that these people will be sacked if there are no clients, if there are no customers overseas. But we are talking about many more people that are forced to pick cotton, including children. And if you put them on scale, clearly the number of people involved in forced labor is greater, much, much, much greater than those who can potentially suffer from the boycotts.
I just had a kind of more of a history question. I'm just tangentially aware of the Uzbek issue, but it's really great to see kind of the impact that's happened over such a long period. And I'm just curious why Turkmenistan was not part of the Uzbekistan push from way back when, given it seems like it's a long-standing, entrenched issue. Was it just because it's this black box country that, Ruslan keeps mentioning, or is there any other specific reasons why both weren't kind of approached in the same way, given this is the same sector and state-run issue?
Yeah. One, I think that the reports came out about Uzbekistan first, but even though the reports were starting to come out 2006, 2007, it did exist in both countries. Because under the Stalinist era, they kind of looked at their overall map and they said, okay, this part of the USSR will harvest cotton, period. And they kind of, different parts of the country, they had them take on different manufacturing practices. Then when all of the CIS or the stands separated from the USSR, you had these dictators that stayed in place, and most of the revenue from these national industries were going into the pockets of the dictators and their, close circle. Uzbekistan produces a lot more cotton. I think they were I think at one point, well, they're the 5th largest producer of cotton. Pardon me? Please be the 3rd. Exporting. Because China, India, and the United States produce more, but I think that they're one of the largest exporters. So it's kind of like that difference between producing and exporting. But I think so the volume is a lot bigger, and they had a special relationship with Bangladesh. So Bangladesh was getting I don't know, 70 or 80% of all its cotton from Uzbekistan. So I think that's why it was more in our understanding and more attention. Turkmenistan's volume is a lot smaller. So that's one of it, and we didn't know Ruslan back then. Actually, I think some of the capacity was a little bigger. There was more funding for it, yeah, and with less of that now. We're all in need of more funding now, but yeah. Any questions from those on the phone? Oh, do you have to unmute them? Oh, just checking for questions from people on the phone.
Hi, can I ask a question? You mentioned, I wonder if you could say more about the choke point you mentioned with the yarn and the cotton supply chain, and how YES will address that. Maybe I missed this, but what does YES include then? What would the audits and the monitoring, how would that play out in practice in the spinning mills to sort of see where this cotton is coming from and why? And can you talk more about why the choke point idea and how that is so important?
Yeah, thanks. And could you go back to the slide that talks about the due diligence? Oh, all right. We'll pull it up, and I don't know if I have all the exact slides explaining YES. I know I had that yesterday in the DOL presentation, but what we're looking at are, actually stay on this slide for a minute, this is good. So first, that companies have policies and management systems that are demonstrating their commitment not to source cotton with forced labor, but then also how are they ensuring that with their suppliers? So being able to know certain information about their suppliers, asking their suppliers to also instill policies. Even we've seen some companies put it into their contracts with their suppliers that they can't source cotton from certain countries, or that they're taking steps to ensure that the cotton doesn't have forced labor in it. The other aspect of that is the concept of a mass balance system, being able to prove that where you're sourcing your cotton from. So the audit would include a spot check of looking at where the cotton is coming from, both the high risk and the low risk countries. If it's coming from the high risk countries, then does it work with the Better Cotton Initiative or Fair Trade or some of the other efforts? I mean, and Olam is such an interesting company because although they are sourcing from Turkmenistan, they're also in Africa. They own some of their own gins. They're doing livelihood development, and they have all this assurance with the farmers that they source from in Africa, which is completely opposite mentality and difference from Turkmenistan. The Olam used to source quite a lot from Uzbekistan, and it's interesting to see they've pulled out of there. So I think with some engagement, Lauren, like you were saying, that we could encourage Olam to pull out of Turkmenistan. So it's an overall focus on, like I said, the policy and management systems, the supplier management, the overall management of the cotton, being able to prove where it all comes from. I would say that's it in a nutshell. We do have the draft standard is on our website right now, and though that's gone through a lot of edits, and as I said, we'll be launching that on March 20th, so we can make sure that everyone who is invited and RSVP'd for this event is invited, so that they could see more specifically what the standard encompasses. It is only how spinners are managing their cotton material, their raw material. It doesn't have to do with the labor conditions inside the spinning mill. That's been a big question for folks. There are so many other efforts and initiatives and codes of conduct, et cetera, out there looking at labor conditions inside the facilities that we didn't want to replicate that. We'd rather partner with other organizations that are looking at that piece so that, we're not duplicating efforts. Yep. And then I think from, the communicating activities and providing remediation, it's really looking at giving opportunities for grievances or questions, and following up with your partners to assure or to remediate any harm that's been done. We know that the cotton traders are a really key stakeholder in all of this. We were just talking to others about the leverage of cotton traders just yesterday. And that's, they do have information as to, they're a link not only to country of origin, but then, possibly, who the gins are, and then you're able to get more specific in regards to location. And I think it is going to take an industry-wide shift to start having more transparency and accountability in this section of the supply chain that's been a black hole for a long time. But when we start I've had traders say to me, well, I'll ship to a spinner whatever the spinner asks for, and if the spinner doesn't say that it doesn't want Turkmen or Uzbek cotton, then, and the price is right, then they're going to, that's what they're going to buy, or that's what they'll ship. So we need to get everyone starting to work together to address the harm that's being done.
Patricia, maybe this was covered earlier, but with the Uzbek campaign, I'm remembering a very effective data point was knowing what the annual harvest, what amounts were going to the trade floors, and I'm wondering if any meaningful data will come out of Turkmenistan on an annual basis, or is that just not quantifiable?
For cotton volume.
Yeah, I mean, with Uzbekistan, I forget what year it was, but companies were saying, no, we are not sourcing Uzbek cotton, but yet the amount that was going to the market was still quite high, demonstrating that some of these pledges they were saying they were adhering to were not being enforced. So it gave us a talking point saying, well, there's still all this cotton coming out of Uzbekistan. You see what I'm saying? Or no?
Yeah. I think, the U.S. Department of Agriculture does track volumes of global imports and exports for cotton. So I think that's going to be a good data point to see where that cotton's going, as well as that MIT database that I mentioned.
Yeah.
But I know that Anti-Slavery International, they're looking at some of the cotton flows, where that cotton is going. So as Ruslan said, I think data in general coming out of Uzbekistan is quite difficult, or out of Turkmenistan is difficult, but there are, overall, we met yesterday with the International Cotton Advisory Committee, and their goal, that they're made up of government agencies, and they were saying they're hoping Turkmenistan will join ICAC in the near future. That's an opportunity to engage the Turkmen government. But they want to promote cotton as a whole. And it's like, all right, well, if you really want to promote cotton in the world, you need to deal with this problem of forced labor in the cotton industry. And you need to put some resources towards it and engage the governments who are your members to deal with it. And they're they love data, and they're tracking a lot of these numbers too. So we'll have to look into that, Susan. But I think, being able to provide as much data as we can on cotton flows, is something that we'll look into.
Great.
Yeah, it's generally the unavailability of data, and I should say that with the progress of forced labor monitoring and reporting, the authorities have become even more cautious on what they release. For instance, as for foreign trade, we receive information from the reports of the Turkmen Commodity Exchange, and what they say is simply purchasers from Bangladesh, India, and Turkey bought cotton this past week, and they paid this much. That's it. They don't give the volumes. They only give the amount of money, and they only list the countries where these clients are based. That's it.
So is there any way of backing into that? If you've got how much they paid, what was the going rate in Turkey, or that they were paying for cotton from other?
Perhaps there is a way to do it, but that would assume digging deeper into the commodity exchange files. And unfortunately, if you display an interest in that might raise questions among the officials. But this is something we should really be looking at, and so that we can operate with figures, at least with those that are available or that we can obtain. And thanks for noting that.
I think the cotton book publication does have a lot of prices. It's because it's a global commodity that's traded on the futures market, et cetera. There's a lot of tracking of prices. And it's interesting, this Uzbek textile guy who was at the meeting on Monday, he's like, we can't get as much, because of your pledge and the harm, we can't sell our product as high of a price. They're paying us less. It's like, well, and forced labor, and people start paying you the going rates. That actually happened in the Congo with tantalum or coltan. That unless you can prove that it's from a conflict-free mine, you're not receiving the going rate that people do want to discount. Unfortunately, those that are just trying to make more profit are then willing to buy the cheaper cotton, you know. So in that sense, it's, I don't know, it's a bit of a catch-22. But I think digging into some of that cotton outlook data, we might be able to find out more about the exact prices and, you know, track if there's ideally if the price of Turkmen cotton starts going down, that's going to, you know, due to us elevating this issue, that will be beneficial to encourage them to change the practices. All right, we are almost to the top of the hour, so I think I just want to thank Ruslan again for joining us here in New York, and thank you all for coming and listening in. We'll have the recording available so people can listen to it while making dinner in the future, who can join us in person. But I really like your idea, Lauren, of coming up both with a, did she get off? Oh. But in general, it's for all of you, really, is both a list of investors that we can reach out to and a priority list of companies to engage, so we can do this push on getting more investors to sign on to our investor statement, as well as then do a bigger push to engage companies and encourage them to sign the pledge, join YES, and really take more action in their supply chain. All right, thanks everybody. Have a good weekend. Bye-bye.
This is
Thank
helpful.
you.